June 14, 1944. Camp Hartsfield, Texas. The metal door clanged shut behind 50 German women, sealing them inside a concrete room that smelled of cold stone and lingering moisture. Barefoot and stripped to their underclothes, they stood shivering on the slick floor, breaths trembling in the heavy air. Helene Vogt clutched Greta Meinhardt's arm so tightly she felt the bones beneath her skin. Across the room, another woman murmured a prayer, halting, broken, more fear than faith. They had been warned before deployment, warned by men in uniforms who spoke with absolute authority. If captured by Americans, expect cruelty, expect humiliation, expect death disguised as mercy. And the word they had been taught to fear most was the one the guard had spoken that morning showers. The room looked exactly like the nightmares propaganda had painted. Steel pipes ran across the ceiling like exposed veins. Drains dotted the concrete floor. There were no windows, no benches, no escape. When the pipes gave a low, groaning rumble, several women screamed. One collapsed. Another beat on the locked door with her fists, whispering "Neen, Neen, bitnicht so." The translator shouted something in English, voice cracking, but terror drowned out every syllable. Then a sharp metallic click echoed from the ceiling. The nozzles twitched, 50 bodies froze. The pipes roared to life. The women of Transport 47 had spent 3 days crossing the blazing southern plains, in a rattling train car, pressed shoulder to shoulder with fear and exhaustion. Most were barely in their 20s, clerks, nurses, radio operators captured in North Africa and Italy. They had expected interrogation, starvation, maybe execution. What they found instead was Texas. Through the dusty windows they saw wide-open fields, cattle grazing under a sun too bright to feel real, and young American soldiers leaning casually against trucks, their hats tipped back as if war didn't exist. Nothing resembled the horrors they had been warned about. Still, the warnings clung to them like a second skin. Americans kill prisoners slowly. Americans torture. Americans break you before they bury you. So when the gates of Camp Hartsfield opened and the guards spoke politely too, politely, the women's fear didn't fade. It deepened. Kindness was suspicious, softness was dangerous. And the moment they were ordered to shower, everything inside them collapsed. What happened next would not only shatter years of propaganda, but reshape how these women understood enemies, humanity, and survival itself. It was in Texas of all places that they would learn the strangest truth of the war. Sometimes mercy is more powerful than any weapon. Before we continue, tap like and subscribe to support stories that history tried to forget. Your engagement helps keep these voices alive. June 14, 1944. The heat rolled across central Texas in heavy, shimmering waves as the train screeched to a stop beside the receiving yard of Camp Hartsfield, a remote POW installation hidden among wheat fields and grazing cattle. The doors clattered open, and 50 exhausted German women were ordered to step down into the blinding light. They moved slowly, stiff from the 3-day journey, their boots coated with dust, their uniforms still carrying the sand of North Africa. Among them was Elise Ritter, a 26-year-old former Red Cross nurse, whose hands had not stopped trembling since they were captured. Beside her walked Lena Brandt, barely 20, a radio operator whose face had hollowed from fear, wrath and hunger. They expected beatings, they expected humiliation, they expected the cruelty they had been promised. Instead, a freckled American sergeant barely older than them approached with a canteen. "Welcome to Texas," he said gently, offering water. No threat, no shove, just water. The women exchanged frightened glances. Elise refused the canteen at first, certain it was a trick. But when one brave woman accepted a sip and didn't collapse, the others followed slowly. Still, fear clung to them like a shadow. As they were marched through the camp, Lena whispered, "Where are the torture rooms?" Elise whispered back, "They hide them. They always hide them." Neither believed what their eyes showed. Neat wooden barracks, gardens, a chapel, and guards who seemed more bored than vicious. Inside the registration hall, Captain Raymond Collins, the camp commander, addressed them through a translator. "You will be treated under the Geneva Convention," he said. "You will work, you will rest, you will eat. You are prisoners, yes, but you are people." The women stiffened at the last word. People. In Germany, their worth depended on obedience, paperwork, ideology. Being called human without conditions felt far and almost dangerous. That night they were served vegetable stew and soft white bread. Elise stared at her bowl, convinced it was poisoned, but hunger won, and when she tasted only broth and carrots, something inside her cracked, not trust, not yet, but confusion. The next morning began the moment that would redefine the entire camp. The women were ordered to line up for medical checks and delousing. The translator announced one word that sucked the air out of the room. Showers. Every muscle in Elisa's body locked. Lena grabbed her arm, nails digging painfully. Showers, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's happening. They had heard the stories, rumors whispered among prisoners, propaganda repeated by officers, rooms disguised as bathhouses, pipes that did not release water, metal doors that sealed with finality. A woman named Marta, usually composed, collapsed to her knees, shaking in silent terror. Another began muttering prayers. The guards looked bewildered, unable to understand the panic rising in the women like a flood. Still trembling, they were herded into a concrete building. The room inside was cold, windowless, drains on the floor, metal nozzles overhead exactly like the nightmares they had been warned about. The panic erupted. Someone screamed. Someone sobbed. Lena clawed at the door as if she could escape through metal. The sergeant in charge turned to the translator, Corporal Daniel Weber, a second-generation German-American. What's going on? Why are they acting like this? Weber swallowed hard, pale. Sir, they think we're going to gas them. The sergeant froze, horror washing over him. You tell them it's just water. Tell them they're safe. Weber translated, shouting over the fear, but words bounced uselessly off panic. No one moved. No one believed him. So he did something none of the women expected. He stepped into the shower room, fully dressed in his uniform, boots and all. He turned one of the metal valves. Water burst from the nozzle, clear, warm, harmless, not poison, not death, just water. Weber let it soak through his shirt, dripping down his face. It's safe, he shouted in German. It's only a shower, nothing else. You will not be harmed here. The women stared, stunned. One an older nurse named Greta stepped forward first, shaking so violently she could barely walk. Elise followed, her legs numb, her breath trapped in her chest. When the water hit her, she screamed, but the scream dissolved into sobs, relief, disbelief, an emotional collapse, years in the making. Lena broke down completely, clutching the wall for support as the warm spray washed dirt and fear from her skin. Some women dropped to their knees under the water, crying with the strange, overwhelming realization that they were not about to die. Outside, two young American guards exchanged confused whispers. What the hell did we just witness? I think we just saved their lives without firing a shot. When the women returned to the barracks clean, shaking, wrapped in fresh uniforms, Elise wrote one sentence in her small hidden notebook. Today I learned the enemy may not be the monster I was taught to fear, but trust would not come quickly, not yet. This was only the beginning. The July sun rose early over Camp Westfield, turning the barracks into long shadows that stretched across the dry Texas soil. By the time the German women stepped out for morning roll call, the heat was already gathering, rising from the ground like a second atmosphere. They lined up into rows, quieter than they had been the week before, but no longer trembling like the first day. Fear hadn't vanished, but it had softened into wary observation. Elise, once pale with anxiety, now scanned the camp with thoughtful eyes, studying how the guards moved, how the soldiers joked among themselves, how the Americans seemed almost casual in their authority. It was nothing like the rigid, shouted discipline of the Reich. Here, rules were firm, yes, but not brutal. After roll call, 15 women were chosen for garden duty. Among them were Elise and Helga, who walked side by side toward the fenced vegetable plots behind the Masole. The garden looked surprisingly alive. Rows of young tomatoes, squash vines curling upward, and okra reaching skyward as though trying to escape the heat. The soil was unfamiliar and dry, different from anything they had known back home. But still, it was earth, something their hands understood. An American corporal named Lewis supervised them, barely 30, with a sunburned neck and a habit of humming while he worked. He gave instructions through a translator, but never raised his voice. "We're short on hands," he said. "Just help where you can." Slow and steady. At first, the women worked silently, exchanging only occasional glances. But as the minutes stretched into hours, small conversations began to rise between them. Helga murmured about how Texas soil felt like sand compared to the dark, fertile earth in Bavaria. Another woman nodded, describing how her mother would scold her for planting too shallow. A third laughed softly at the memory of stealing strawberries as a child. Their voices remained hushed, but the sound felt like something returning to life. Round midday, Lewis brought out water. He set a metal bucket under the shade of a half-dead tree and gestured for them to drink. Elise hesitated at first, watching the guards for any sign of mockery or coercion. But when the corporal stepped back respectfully, she approached. The water was cool, shockingly refreshing, and as she drank, Elise felt something she had not felt in months, a sense of being seen as a person, not an enemy body to be controlled. Later that afternoon, the cattle truck arrived. 5 women, including Helga, were selected for ranch duty 10 miles from camp, at a family-owned spread desperate for labor since the local men had gone to war. Elise watched them climb into the back of the truck, her heart suddenly tight. It wasn't fear of danger, it was the dread of separation. In captivity, even fragile bonds became lifelines. Helga squeezed her hand before stepping away. "I will be back by evening," she whispered. "It is only work." The truck bounced across uneven dirt roads, arriving at a ranch where 3 cowboys waited. Near a corral, they were dusty, sunburned, and dressed in faded denim, but their expressions were open, curious rather than hostile. One of them, a lanky young man with sandy hair, tipped his hat politely. "Afternoon, ladies," he said slowly, knowing they might not understand. The translator repeated his words, and the women stiffened, unsure how to behave in this strange, half-wild world of horses and cattle. But within minutes, the mood shifted. A horse nickered at Helga, nudging her shoulder. Startled, she stepped back, but the cowboy chuckled gently. "She likes you," he said. When Helga extended a hesitant hand, the mare leaned into her palm. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped her. The sound startled even her own ears. By midday, the women were brushing horses, filling water troughs, and helping repair the corral fence. Sweat plastered their hair to their foreheads, dust clung to their uniforms, but something like normalcy wrapped around them. They were working with animals, with sun and soil, not weapons or barbed wire. When the ranch bell rang for lunch, the cowboys laid out cornbread, beans, and slices of cured meat on a wooden table under a canvas awning. The Germans froze, confused. Were they allowed to eat with Americans? Captain Harris, who had ridden out to inspect, simply nodded. "Sit," he said. "A meal won't hurt anyone." So they sat, Americans on one side, Germans on the other, but soon the invisible line dissolved. The cowboys passed the cornbread. Helga poured water for Elise. One of the younger women mimed tasting the food with exaggerated hesitation, making the others laugh. The translator struggled to keep up with the scattered attempts at conversation. But the real communication happened in gestures, smiles, and shared labor. That evening, as the truck carried them back to camp, the women were silent, not from fear, but from awe. The world outside the war, the world they had been told was cruel and barbaric, had revealed itself in a Texas rancher's outstretched hand, in the simple act of offering lunch, in a horse's warm breath against their palms. When they returned to Camp Westfield, Elise stepped down first. She looked toward the barracks where Helga had already gone to wash the dust from her face. And for the first time since her capture, Elise felt the faintest flicker of something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. The Texas summer faded into a softer heat by late August, the kind that shimmered lazily above the dirt roads and made the mesquite branches twist like dark fingers against the sky. At Camp Hearn, life moved with a strange quiet rhythm. The German women, once terrified to breathe too loudly, now moved through the camp with a weary familiarity, never free, never forgetful, but no longer afraid of every shadow. For weeks after the announcement of Germany's surrender, the women lived in a limbo that felt heavier than captivity itself. Victory had not brought celebration, it brought uncertainty. Every day, they woke wondering what news would come next. A transport order, a list of survivors, a letter confirming the worst. The camp remained calm, but grief seeped into the corners. Still, small acts of kindness continued quietly. One hot afternoon, while the women worked in the garden, a young guard named Russell approached Elise, the former clerk, with steady hands and a guarded smile. He offered her a folded photograph. It showed a Texas sky streaked with sunset colors and a newborn baby wrapped in a blanket. "My daughter," he said softly through the translator. "She was born while you were working the horses last month." Elise hesitated, then touched the photo, carefully, as though it were something fragile. "She is beautiful," she whispered in German. Russell nodded. "You'll see your family again too, don't lose that." The translator repeated his words, and Elise's breath hitched, not from sadness, but from the startling realization that hope could come from the enemy's lips. That evening, the women gathered outside their barracks, watching the guards play baseball. The crack of the bat, the shouts, the laughter, it all felt impossibly normal. Lottie, the quiet nurse who rarely spoke, murmured, They live so easily, Anna replied. Perhaps that is what peace tastes like. In early September, repatriation orders finally arrived. The women would leave Texas in stages over the next several weeks. Packing was simple. They owned almost nothing: a bar of soap, a folded handkerchief, a photograph traded in secret, letters written but never sent. Yet even these scraps felt too heavy to carry. The night before the first group was scheduled to depart, the Americans held a final gathering in the mess hall. It wasn't a celebration, not exactly. More like a farewell shaped from respect rather than ceremony. The guards pooled what little extra they had: cans of peaches, a jar of honey, coffee, and even a small slab of chocolate. The women entered hesitantly, stunned by the gesture. Captain Harris stood at the front, his voice low and steady. "War makes enemies," he said through the translator, "but mercy makes neighbors. I hope, when you return home, you remember this place not for the fences, but for the people." The women sat, hands trembling over plates they never expected to see again. Elise raised her cup of coffee, her German accent thick as she said, "We will remember the kindness, even if no one believes us." The next morning, trucks lined up at the gate. Dust swirled in rising curls as engines rumbled awake. The women climbed aboard, some with shaky legs, some with stiff resolve. Elle clutched the bar of soap from the first shower. Anna tucked a Coca-Cola bottle into her pack like a relic. Before the trucks pulled away, Captain Harris approached the women. Elise leaned out and handed him a small embroidered handkerchief stitched with red thread. "Uneven but earnest, for dignity," she said. He pressed it to his chest. "Go home," he answered, "and build something better." As the trucks rolled out of Camp Hearn, the women looked back one last time. They did not see the fences. They saw the garden where they had planted tomatoes, the horse corral where they had laughed for the first time in months, the mess hall where English and German voices had mixed over Christmas songs. They saw a place they had entered in terror and left with something closer to peace. Germany was not ready for their stories. Cities lay in ruins. Families were broken. No one wanted to hear that the enemy had shown mercy. Some believed the women had been brainwashed, seduced by comfort. Others dismissed their memories as exaggeration. But slowly, quietly, the truth stayed alive in diaries, in whispers, in dreams. Elle kept the soap wrapped in paper. Anna placed the Coke bottle on her kitchen shelf. Elise kept a faded photograph of the Texas sky tucked in a drawer. Years passed. In 1957, a small reunion took place in Hamburg. Only 12 women attended, yet the room pulsed with memories too large for language. Someone began to hum Still Nacht, and within seconds, German voices once again blended with echoes of a Texas Christmas long gone. They passed around photographs of Camp Hearn, the horses, the garden, the makeshift Christmas tree decorated with ration tin stars. No one cried because they were sad. They cried because, in a world rebuilt from ashes, they had once found humanity in captivity. "Texas," one whispered, "was the only place during the war where I saw colors." When they left that night, the city lights reflecting off damp streets, each woman carried the same truth: mercy, even in war, leaves marks deeper than wounds. And kindness, once given, never stops echoing. If this story moved you, even a little, then you already understand why these forgotten chapters of history matter. Wars are remembered through battles and treaties, but true change happens in the quiet places, gardens behind fences, mess halls filled with cautious hope, moments where enemies see each other's humanity for the first time. Stories like this remind us that compassion is powerful enough to break through propaganda, fear, and even barbed wire. And if you want more untold stories like this, stories of ordinary people making extraordinary choices, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Every time someone from across the world shares their perspective, it proves that connection still wins over division. And if you've ever witnessed kindness in an unexpected place, share that moment below. These stories deserve to be remembered not just for history's sake, but for the future we're all building together. Because mercy is a legacy, and every time we choose understanding over hate, we help write a better history.